So without any further ado, I will start.
Thank you, Madam. Before I get started, please take a moment and read my Anybody that's spent a lot of time around young children knows that one of the most exhilarating and magical moments for a child is the first time that they get to see the response of their parents and adults the first time they utter a swear word. Soon after, they learn that swear words, while hilarious, can also land you in a world of trouble. Yet the allure remains. Growing up, I was very cautious about swear words until about 6th grade. It was 1995 in the era of Words Dehumanize Me, and I was ready to push some boundaries. I'm from Lonsdale, Minnesota, which is a small town, and attended a small Catholic school from kindergarten to 8th grade, where the total number of students in my grade never exceeded 20. Since it was 1995, there wasn't Snapchat or Instagram, so I was kind of limited in my modes of self-expression. So for me, my main tool became my notebook cover. Since 1995, obviously I was obsessed with yin yangs, like everybody else. I was also obsessed with boys. Now this presented a bit of a challenge as I was related to most of the boys in the grade. So one day I would love Tony, and then the next day I would find out he was my second cousin, and I had to update my. In this small town, I also had an arch nemesis, Julie K. In 6th grade, something happened at recess. Mrs. Kadada, who was my teacher, fell. And I really did think she was laughing. So I did the only natural thing and also started laughing. But it turns out Mrs. Kadada was actually crying. So I looked like a monster, and Julie took that opportunity to make sure that everybody knew about it, including Mrs. Kadada. So I found myself in the principal's office and had to write a paper on feelings, which, what is that? Keno, don't let me down. So I had to decide what would be the best possible thing to write about Julie on my notebook to really capture just how horrible she was. And I had heard a song in the this word in the Green Day song, and I had also heard the 8th grade boys talking about this word on the bus, just to like tons and tons of giggles. So I knew that it was probably the perfect word to use for Julie on my notebook. This isn't what I wrote, but I asked a group of colleagues for a whimsical euphemism for what I wrote, and this is what they came up with that I thought was pretty amazing. But the word that I said about Julie starts with an M, and it kind of rhymes with fast debates. You might be asking, why would you write this on your notebook? Couldn't anybody see it and tell on you, yes, that's exactly what happened. So Julie heard about my notebook, gave it to Mrs. Kadada. Mrs. Kadada kept me after class, through tears, hers, not mine. She said, what would your grandma say? Because of course she knew my grandma. And I don't think, I'm sure my grandma doesn't know this word. And back in the principal's office, Mr. Colino was pounding on the table as his face turned red and the veins were bulging from his neck. He insisted that everybody wrote out loud. I refused, so my dad was called in. My dad took me home. I'm sitting on the porch. I remember my dad crying and saying he wasn't going to tell my mom about what happened because it would upset her too much. The moral of the story is I learned that day that words have power. And that you should also really know what a word means before you use it and think about the impact it could have on the people around you. Some disclaimers. I'm not the swear word police. Please don't stop inviting me to your happy hours, etc. That's not my goal. I'm not over the entertainment industry. I understand that I can deplore gun violence while still totally enjoy a James Bond movie or play Call of Duty. And I have no issues with groups of people or individuals who want to reclaim words that have traditionally been used to marginalize them. That's an individual's choice. But I do want to continue to talk about swear words a little bit, so I want you to take a moment and think about what word, as a child, you would have been most mortified to have your grandmother hear you say. Now think about which word today you'd be most mortified to have your boss hear you say. Maybe they're the same, maybe they're different, but either way, those represent the top of your swear word pyramid at different points in your life. Here's my swear word pyramid as a child. At the base, these words were arguably not swear words. It kind of depended which adult was in the room and whether or not you would receive a reprimand. As you go up the pyramid, the consequences became greater and greater. I put the C word in parentheses because that really wasn't a word that I was familiar with, but if I was, I think that's probably where it would have landed. And at the very top of the pyramid, these are words that I just never said. I knew what they meant, but I, even as a 6th grader, knew that these words were too powerful for me to throw around. But I'm not in Mrs. Cadeta's 6th grade class anymore. Society has changed, and I've been doing a lot about thinking about this, and this is how I have restructured my swear word pyramid. Some of them are still the same, in roughly the same place, but I've decided that all slurs, whether they be racial, identity, or gender-based or otherwise, really belong in that top level of the pyramid. And to be clear, I'm not necessarily equating these words. I think that you can make arguments that some words up in that top part of the pyramid are worse than others, but what they have in common is that they're all dehumanizing and therefore pretty damaging. So why am I talking about swear word pyramids with a bunch of teachers on a Monday morning? Early in the morning for this conversation. Well, I've been thinking about these a lot, and I wanted to kind of take you on my journey, my thought process through this topic. Last spring, my alma mater, St. Olaf College, one of my favorite places in the world, was in the news a lot. This young woman, Madeline, felt as though she did not receive justice in a sexual assault case through the college, and she demanded that the college reevaluate its sexual assault policies and code of student conduct. And since I was planning my 10-year reunion in June, there was a lot happening and a lot of discussion among alumni. I mostly stopped thinking about that topic somewhere in the summer, but then I got pretty distracted by something else. I figured if I was going to tell you about the notebook story and throw up a swear word pyramid and talk about sexual assault, let's just put it all up there. Boom. So, like most Americans, I got pretty wrapped up in the primaries and the debates and electoral college predictions. But there was one moment in the campaign that really brought me back to this topic. Regardless of how you feel about the election or how you felt about this story, chances are you talked about it. And if you're like me, whenever there's a gender issue that comes up in the media, you go to your 8 or 9 feminist Facebook groups or the dozens of leading feminist scholars that you follow on Twitter, and then you hear what they have to say. So as conversations around the story developed and women found themselves talking about these kinds of issues, the conversation shifted away from legal definitions of rape and sexual assault to language that was more inclusive to women's experiences. The hashtag #NotOK brought up the conversation. Whether what happened to them qualified or didn't qualify under the textbook definition, it wasn't okay. And a trend started on social media where women identified and shared their memories of the first time something not okay happened to them. And they focused on the first time because unfortunately for many women, there are many to choose from. And for many, this happened very young, sometimes as young as 5, 6, or 7. And as I started to think about my first not okay experiences, I really wanted to reach out to people that I trusted. So I reached out to my best friends from college. I have been so close with these women for 10 years. We went to St. Olaf together, we lived together, we're still in daily contact together, thank goodness for group text. And I know everything about them. I know their most intimate hopes and dreams and fears, and like no topic has ever been off the table. What's interesting is we had never talked about our not okay experiences. So I started the conversation off with some things that I was remembering from when I was 12 and 13 and 14. And as they shared their stories, I realized for us, that was a pretty median age of when these things started happening. So all of this was happening over a weekend, and I'm having some pretty intensive thoughts and memories. And then on Monday morning, I showed up at work. I work at Hopkins North Junior High, and I spend my days with 12, 13, and 14-year-olds. And I just felt this huge weight that day, thinking that these things are happening to kids right now, or have been happening, and I have no idea what to do about it. But I felt like I needed to try, so I decided to start looking at some research. My guess is I really don't need to tell anyone in this room that sexual assault and domestic violence are pretty big problems in the country. I won't dwell on these statistics for long, but I think it's worth noting that based on who registered for this class, between 8 and 10 women in this room have likely been sexually assaulted. And if you expand that definition to the hashtag not okay, my guess is almost every woman in this room has been impacted in some way. We know that it's pervasive. We know that about 8 in 10 people know their assailant. Of the 1,000 rapes that get reported, only 6 perpetrators ever are jailed. We know that the consequences aren't just in a moment. People who experience sexual assaults are very likely to have PTSD. They're at a 40% risk of STDs, and they're 13 times more likely to attempt suicide at some point in their life. And that's not even looking at the immeasurable problems in current and future relationships that can develop. My husband said I had to cut it off there. I had more fun statistics, but we'll keep it there. Today, much of the debate and controversy around sexual assault are coming from college campuses where women are statistically most likely to experience assault than any other point in their lives. As I'm thinking about this, January rolls around, and this happened. The U of M has a really special place in my heart. It's where I earned my teaching license and my master's degree, and it's where I met my husband, who happens to be a lifelong Gopher football fan and season ticket holder, despite changing records for that team. This story generated a lot of controversy throughout the state and the country and within our household. This is my brilliant, wonderful, feminist husband and my adorable fur baby. And while we were having this discussion one day, he said, "Yeah, but consent is confusing." So I worked my way like all around my sweater pyramid. Pretty sure that neighbors are screaming like, "It's so confusing!" But I took a moment and reminded myself that he is wonderful and brilliant and a feminist. So I gave him a chance to clarify, and I'm really glad that I did. And what he had to say was, it is confusing legally. Colleges have not been able to come to a decision. Is consent an affirmative yes, or just the lack of a no? And despite how confusing consent can be, it doesn't eliminate the problem that occurs when an otherwise good person does a very bad thing. And that choice to do a very bad thing comes easier because we live in a culture that reinforces the belief that women are less than, and our beliefs are formed through and by language. So as I started to think more and more about language, I thought of this pyramid. We teach this in 7th grade US history. And when you reach the conclusion of this pyramid, you have examples of some of the worst events in human history. The Holocaust, Rwanda, Cambodia. But if you look at the base layers, they represent a progression of tools that are used by groups to oppress others. As you'll see, language plays a really key role in these early steps on this pyramid. The first step, classification, is when people put others in categories that distinguish between us and them. This is done using ethnicity, race, religion, nationality. I would also argue sexual identity and gender. And that is done mostly through language. In the next step, symbolization, names and symbols are given to the classification, And although symbols are not technically language, we interpret them through language, and certainly names are done through language. The step discrimination is when a dominant group uses law, customs, and political power to deny the rights of its victims. Now we know we have laws in the United States that are supposed to get rid of discrimination, but yet we know discrimination still happens. The fourth step, I think, is really the critical turning point. It's when one group denies the humanity of another group. Members of the dehumanized group are equated with animals, vermin, insects, or diseases, and what makes this so key is it overcomes the human condition that violence is a bad thing. This step has to happen in order for you to commit violence. So what words do we use as a society to dehumanize women today? I think there's probably a lot of them. The most literal ones that I came up with are the B word and the C word. Obviously the B word referring to an animal, and the C word referring to a sexual organ. How do saying and thinking these words impact how we view women in our society? I can tell you one thing, they're really, really ingrained. Even though this is a topic I've been thinking about quite a bit, I still struggle with these words myself. And the other day, I was driving and experienced some road rage, as one does, and I actually think that's pretty legitimate, because if somebody does something while you're driving, they're putting your life in danger, and so I think it's a good place to test out our really deep-seated stuff. So I was driving down the road, and a woman cut me off, and I just screamed the B word at her, just let it out, and I had this second where I was like, whoa, you were trying not to say these things, and I wondered, if the person that had cut me off had been an African-American man, would I have screamed out the N-word? No way. No way. And if I did, I would have pulled over the car and had to oh, I really need to unpack this. So why was it so much easier for me to say this other dehumanizing word? Yeah, not equating, just anyway. For the record, when I found this image, this was the article that I was associated with, which is amazing. So where do we go from here, and how can we possibly incorporate this in our classrooms? I don't really know, but I have a few ideas. I started teaching in Hopkins in 2008, and I was teaching 7th, 9th, and 10th grade. And I can tell you that 2008 and 7th, 9th, and 10th grade, everything was gay. Every day, I was pulling, literally every day, I was pulling kids out of the hall, had conversations, I was talking about why this was inappropriate. I was making phone calls home to parents to try to reach out and get some support, and basically being told over and over again that I was just being a delicate snowflake, and I needed to leave their kids alone, and I was really struggling with this issue. And a couple years later, Angela Wilcox printed off these posters that were inspired by students in Madison, Wisconsin, and created by Gay Straight Alliance for Safe Schools. This poster completely changed the climate of my classroom. I had a short 3-minute conversation saying the same things I'd been saying over and over. This is why this is harmful, and maybe you should use different words, and here are some words you can use. And anytime I heard a student say this or something else offensive, I just pointed at the poster. We paused, they looked, they picked a word, and we kept moving on. What was so great about this poster is that it gave students the linguistic tools to make better decisions. And I don't want kids out of my classroom not learning, and I certainly don't want that with any of the other words that I've been thinking about today. What could you possibly do? Well, I think the best way to start is to start with yourself. Start noticing the words you say and think when you are angry or frustrated or someone cuts you off in traffic. Try to identify why you're angry and use those words instead. And if you just really need to use some swear words, go for it. But try to pick some that are gender neutral and maybe not as dehumanizing as others. With your students, have some courageous conversations. If you hear a dehumanizing word in your room, make the student define it, because that's important. Try to identify why they're mad, and then offer them some kind of alternative. My goal in 2017 is to reduce violence by changing the way we talk and think about women. I like to think small. So my action plan is first I have a lot of learning to do. I need to do a lot of research. I need to have a lot of conversations. I need to do a lot of thinking. And then my second plan is to create. I want to create K-12 plus curriculum, and I'm not saying that we should teach kindergartners like the B and C word and then tell them not to use it, though that would be pretty fun. But at any age with students, you can help them see the humanity in themselves and others, and you can get them to start thinking about how powerful their words are and what impact they have. I'm also hoping to create some media to this end. And I'm very inspired by our LGBT community in Minnesota and around the nation and all of the gains they made, and human history-wise, a really short amount of time. So why did I give this talk today? Well, First of all, I wanted to force myself to kind of process these thoughts I've been having and organize them in a way that can be deliverable to a group of people. I wanted to create a conversation with the people that I think are like the smartest, best community in the world, Hopkins teachers. And I need your help. If I'm going to do the learning I want to do and create what I want to create, I'm going to have to reach out to a lot of different people, and I don't know all these people. So if you see an article that you think relates to this that I might be interested in, please send it to me. If you know any of these folks or are these folks yourself, set up a meeting, get me in the room. And if you think this is really, really stupid, by all means, please send me your constructive criticism. Maybe wait a day for my anxiety to go down, because you have almost certainly felt this at some point during the presentation, as have I. So I thought I would begin with Ron and end with Ron, and I really appreciate your courtesy.